How's it going, guys? So today, with all the stuff that's going on in the world right now, I really think this is a good opportunity to kind of make a video and talk about what I think you guys can do to try and survive maybe this tough time as a software engineer. I think right now with all the stuff that's going on with coronavirus, I think a lot of people are either one, being laid off, two, cannot find a job, or three, will have to find a job shortly. And because of that, I thought today would be a good chance to make a video just talking about my tips for how you guys can either stay employed or how you guys can try and find a job if you either lost your job or are currently looking for a job in the market right now. So none of you guys live under a rock, and I'm sure you guys are all aware of coronavirus and the effects that it's having on our world economy right now. And so I thought that, combined with the fact that yesterday marks 2 years since when I was laid off from my first job from college, I definitely learned some stuff during that time when I was laid off. And I thought it could be helpful for some people out there because I think, one, people are either losing their jobs currently or about to lose their jobs or have just lost their jobs because the economy, some companies can't stay afloat with their full staff. Or two, I think people who are currently looking for jobs right now, it's kind of unfortunate because some companies either aren't looking to hire, or two, aren't really willing to bring people on remotely because it seems like most cities and places around the world are kind of like sheltering in place, or non-essential workers are not allowed to go to work right now. So it's definitely a tough time to either break into the industry or hopefully you're already in the industry, but it might be a tough time to remain in the industry right now, or at least at your current job. So I thought it made sense to basically give you guys my tips that I learned throughout being laid off almost 2 years ago now to the date. I was laid off March 20th, 2018. It's now March 21st, 2020. And so I think that I can probably share some of my experiences and basically the things that I learned through being laid off from my first job out of college. So because of this kind of crazy economy and all the stuff that's going on in the world, I definitely think that everyone should kind of prepare for this. Even if you're not in this scenario right now, I think it's possible that it could be you, unfortunately, eventually. And at the very least, I think it's an important thing to know about just in general for any time in your career that you may or may not lose your job. So my first tip for you guys really, and I think this is very on brand with my channel and the content that I create, is just to keep your interview skills sharp. And I say that because I think this really is more important now than ever before because of a couple reasons. The first one, I think, is that a lot of companies are actually cutting their hiring because they either don't have the money to bring on new people or they don't want to onboard people remotely, right? So I think you really need to be able to convince companies that, one, you're not only worth bringing on, but two, you're actually worth bringing on remotely. So because of government mandates and things like that, a lot of people are actually not allowed to go to work right now currently. Like New York is like that right now. Non-essential workers are not allowed to actually go into the office. So I'm not even in New York right now, but that's definitely a challenge that people are going to face, I think. So I think another reason to keep your interview skills sharp right now is because there's definitely a lot of people who I think are about to be laid off or are currently looking for a job, generally speaking, in software engineering. And then I think on top of that, a lot of companies are not going to be hiring as much. So I think the supply for jobs is going to be way lower than demand or how many people need or want to be employed. So I think that's going to cause another problem. I think on top of that, another hurdle that we're now going to have to get over is I think a lot of companies probably aren't going to want to onboard people remotely. And what I mean by that is now you're not only going to have to convince companies that you're worth bringing on and crush your interviews from that respect, but on top of that, you're going to have to get over the additional hurdle that I think a lot of companies are going to have to begin onboarding people remotely. Right? And so I think for some people, remote development is very normal, and a lot of people just are remote developers in general full time. But I think for me personally, and probably a lot of other people, that's just going to be another hurdle that you have to convince companies of, right? You need to bring me onto your organization, and you need to trust that I can get up to speed and do my work efficiently without ever seeing you in person, or at least probably not seeing you in person for a little bit because of what's happening in the world. My next tip for you guys is to keep your resume up to date, and I think this really piggybacks off the last point. I think keeping your resume as up to date as possible is super important because if you're looking for a job, your resume is really your foot in the door, right? Your resume is what's going to get you the interview. Your interview is going to get you the job. So it's really the first step in the process, and your resume is your first impression, and people remember your first impression. People will remember your resume, people will remember what you've done, what you say you've done, and hopefully you can actually back it up when you talk to them on the phone or during a technical phone screen, or whatever it may be. So I think keeping your resume up to date is super important to put your best foot forward and again, show companies that they should bring you on, and your resume should show them why. My third tip is a little bit more abstract, but it's really just the idea that don't think that this can't happen to you. I think especially me getting laid off from my first job out of college, I definitely learned that, and I will take that with me probably for the rest of my career. You never know what's going to happen. When I got laid off, I really just thought it was kind of weird that my boss messaged me at like 7:30 in the morning and asked me to come in before everyone else. But I was like, I'm the first one in the office anyways. Like, yeah, of course I'm going to be there. I'm always the first one there. But it's weird, right? And like, you don't know what's going to happen. And I think especially in times like this, there's a lot of uncertainty. And so don't think that it can't happen to you. So what I think you should really do, instead of being like, I have job security, I'm not going to get fired or laid off or lose my job, make sure that you actually have a contingency plan in place and that you have steps to move forward if you unfortunately are in the position where you're out of your job. So I think actually a really good example of this is my sister Courtney. My sister Courtney actually moved from New York City in January all the way to California, so now she lives in San Francisco for a job opportunity that she got, and she actually got laid off by that startup a week later. So I guess it runs in the family or something, but Courtney rebounded really, really well. She had a plan in place for how to move forward, and now she's doing great, and she's still living in California. So my next tip for you guys is to be learning skills constantly and make sure that you guys are learning skills that are in high demand. I think as software engineers, a lot of times it's actually our job to continuously learn, because I think if you don't, you're kind of going to phase yourself out of the market, right? With all these new emerging technologies, languages, and frameworks, I think if you're not learning, one, you're doing yourself a disservice, but two, you're not really ensuring that you're going to have your job. I think a lot of times things phase out, right? Things aren't popular anymore. And I think by that time, if you're still stuck in that language or that framework, it's going to be harder to find a job. I'm not saying you're going to lose your job, but I think you'll increase your job security if you're constantly learning things that are in demand and that are important to know according to the market. So I think that if you guys want to make sure that you get a job, try and make sure that you're learning those skills that are in high demand in a market currently, or make sure that you're constantly learning new things to show your employer why you're so valuable. And I think especially in times like this, things that are in high demand are probably going to be picked up first, right? If you know Cobalt and Cobalt's not in high demand, and then someone else knows C++, right? Maybe there's a reason why that person's getting the job over you, or at least are getting the interview instead of you. So I kind of mentioned this a little bit before, but I think it's super important to have a contingency plan of sorts in case things do go south and you do end up losing your job. I think it's really important to actually have steps in place that you're guaranteeing yourself that you will take to make sure that you can get back on your feet and find a job in the market again. So I think when I say have a contingency plan, it's not just enough to say, okay, I lost my job, I'm going to find another one. I think you really need to have concrete steps in terms of what you're going to do to make sure that you actually land that next job. And so some of the things I think that you can do to make sure you stay afloat while you're looking for the next job is things like contract work. I think you could work on lucrative side projects, hopefully if you have any. Another thing that you could do is something like Fiverr or other websites where you could do work for some amount of money that you set for people. But really make sure that, again, you're doing the big things like sharpening your interview skills, watching my channel, and also you have an up-to-date resume when you apply to new opportunities. So I think this next tip is really just about general financial advice, but I think everyone, hopefully, if you can afford to do it, should have some sort of rainy day fund. And what I mean by that is just money that's really put away and set aside so that if you actually are ever in the unfortunate situation where you do lose your job, you actually already have some money set aside that's actually for this exact reason, right? You have some money so that you can survive maybe 3 to 6 months paying your rent, buying groceries, buying clothes, whatever else you may need. The number you could actually determine as to how much money is set away, but that will keep you, fed, and that will keep you housed while you actually try and find that next job. So I think you should always be putting away money to save for that, or if you can, take that money as a lump sum, put it aside. I typically do it based on my rent to make sure that I have 3 to 6 months rent safely stashed away in the event that I do lose my job. I have some buffer room to make sure that I can get back on my feet. So I think this last tip is kind of hard to think about right now. It might be hard to grasp, but I think it's really to be grateful and to be positive. And I think probably people now are going to think like, how can I be positive? How can I be grateful in a time like this? But I think one, be positive of the fact that we're going to get through this, right? Coronavirus, there was something before, we're in the middle of it now, there's going to be something after. And then I think on top of that, be grateful, right? Be really grateful that you're actually in an industry that's in such high demand. I think there's other people right now who, one, don't have as lucrative of a skill set that you probably do right now, and two, are probably going to have a way harder time finding a job or convincing people to bring them on, even if it's something like hourly wages, right? It's going to be way harder for them to actually break back on the industry, dust themselves off, and get back on their feet. So be really grateful that you're in the industry that you are, and think about those other people who actually might not be as fortunate as you and are kind of out of work indefinitely. So I think that's all I have for today, guys. Sorry if that was sort of like a rant, but I hope this was helpful. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys did, be sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel below, and I'll see you guys in the next one.